Winston Churchill's life traced an arc from neglected aristocratic child to controversial soldier and politician to wartime prime minister and Nobel Prize-winning writer, and finally to elder statesman in retirement. Across these stages, he combined public action with prodigious literary output, leaving behind not only a political legacy, but millions of words of history, biography, and oratory. His story is inseparable from the great conflicts of the 20th century, yet it also illuminates how a single personality used language, spoken and written, to shape both events and memory. Early years and family background. Winston Leonard Spencer Churchill was born on 30 November 1874 at Blenheim Palace in Oxfordshire, the ancestral home of the Dukes of Marlborough. His father, Lord Randolph Churchill, was a rising conservative politician and the younger son of the 7th Duke of Marlborough. His mother, Jenny Jerome, was an American socialite, giving Churchill a mixed British-American heritage that later mattered for his sense of the English-speaking peoples. Churchill's childhood was emotionally difficult. He later recalled feeling neglected by his parents, finding affection mainly from his devoted nurse, Mrs. Everest. At Harrow School, he did poorly in most academic subjects, especially Latin and mathematics, which reinforced his father's decision to steer him toward a military career rather than the classical path expected of many aristocratic sons. After enrolling in the Army class at Harrow, Churchill focused on gaining admission to the Royal Military College at Sandhurst, failing the entrance exam twice before finally passing on his third attempt in 1893. Once there, he applied himself seriously and graduated 20th out of 130, a marked contrast with his earlier record. Commissioned as a second lieutenant in the 4th Queen's Own Hussars in 1895, Churchill was determined both to see active service and to make a name for himself. With the help of family connections, he arranged to report as a war correspondent while serving as an officer, beginning a pattern of combining military experience with journalism and book writing that would characterize his early career. His first significant postings included British India, where he served on the northwest frontier and wrote The Story of the Malacan Field Force, 1898, a polished account based on his dispatches. He then took part in the Anglo-Sudan War, riding with Lord Kitchener's forces and witnessing the Battle of Omdurman. This campaign produced the River War, 1899, an ambitious 2-volume history that already showed his taste for strategic analysis and grand narrative. Seeking further adventure, Churchill went to South Africa as a correspondent during the Second Boer War, was captured in an ambush, and made a dramatic escape from a POW camp, an episode that brought him wide public attention in Britain. By 1900, Churchill had left the regular army and used the fame from his books and speeches to enter politics, winning a seat in Parliament as a Conservative MP for Oldham. Yet military affairs remained central to his identity and later ministerial roles, especially at the Admiralty and in wartime leadership. Early political career and World War I, Churchill's pre-World War I political career saw him shift parties and offices, while cultivating a reputation as energetic, ambitious, and controversial. Disappointed with the conservative leadership, he crossed the floor to join the Liberal Party in 1904 and held several cabinet posts, including President of the Board of Trade and Home Secretary. In October 1911, Prime Minister H. Asquith appointed him First Lord of the Admiralty, placing him in charge of the Royal Navy at a time of intense Anglo-German naval rivalry. As First Lord, Churchill promoted naval modernization. He supported the transition from coal to oil fuel, reorganized the Admiralty, and championed new warships. insisting Britain must outbuild Germany to maintain command of the sea. When World War I began in 1914, he oversaw fleet mobilization and early operations, including troop transport to France and a blockade of Germany. However, his role in the failed Gallipoli campaign, an attempt to force the Dardanelles and knock the Ottoman Empire out of the war, damaged his reputation severely. After heavy losses, he was forced out of the Admiralty in 1915. Churchill briefly served on the Western Front as a battalion commander, seeking to redeem himself through personal risk, before returning to politics later in the war. In the interwar years, he held several posts, including Chancellor of the Exchequer, but by the 1930s, he was largely out of office and out of favor, partly because of his opposition to Indian self-government and his criticism of government policy. Yet this wilderness period allowed him to write extensively and to warn, long before most colleagues, about the dangers of Nazi Germany's rearmament. On 3rd September 1939, the day Britain declared war on Germany after the invasion of Poland, Neville Chamberlain recalled Churchill to government as First Lord of the Admiralty. The signal, "Winston is back," was circulated to the fleet, recalling his earlier tenure. As the war in Europe deteriorated with German victories in Norway and France, Chamberlain's position collapsed. On 10th of May 1940, Churchill became Prime Minister at the head of a coalition government, just as German forces launched their Western offensive. Churchill's wartime premiership, 1940-1945, made his reputation as one of the 20th century's most significant leaders. Facing the fall of France and the threat of invasion, he rejected peace feelers and rallied Britain with speeches that emphasized defiance and endurance. Most famously, "We shall fight on the beaches," and "their finest hour," combining realism about danger with confidence in ultimate victory. He cultivated close ties with U.S. President Franklin Roosevelt, helping to secure Lend-Lease aid and pushing for America's full engagement against the Axis, and later worked with both Roosevelt and Joseph Stalin to coordinate Allied strategy. Strategically, Churchill sometimes clashed with his military advisors and allies, favoring Mediterranean and peripheral operations, North Africa, Italy, before a cross-channel invasion, and he remained deeply concerned about post-war balance of power, particularly Soviet influence in Eastern Europe. Nonetheless, under his leadership, Britain survived the Blitz, fought on multiple fronts, and emerged in 1945 as one of the victorious powers, though greatly weakened economically and overstretched imperially. In the July 1945 general election, held just after victory in Europe, Churchill's Conservative Party suffered a landslide defeat to Labour. Clement Attlee replaced him as Prime Minister, a personal blow that he later described wryly but accepted constitutionally. Out of office, Churchill continued to speak and write, famously warning of an Iron Curtain descending across Europe in a 1946 speech in Fulton, Missouri, and urging Anglo-American cooperation to contain Soviet expansion. Second premiership and retirement, Churchill returned to power in 1951, winning the general election and forming a conservative government in which he again served as prime minister until 1955. His second term focused less on wartime heroics and more on managing Britain's post-war adjustment. He supported the early stages of European integration, navigated Cold War tensions, and sought détente where possible, while domestically accepting much of the welfare state built by labor. Health problems, including a stroke in 1953, limited his effectiveness, and in April 1955, he resigned as prime minister, succeeded by Anthony Eden, though he remained a member of parliament until 1964. In retirement, Churchill spent much of his time at Chartwell, his country home, painting, hosting guests, and writing. He maintained an active public presence through speeches and appearances, and his 80th and 90th birthdays were marked by extensive celebrations at home and abroad, recognizing him as a symbol of wartime leadership and Anglo-American partnership. Churchill died on 24th January 1965 at the age of 90. His state funeral drew dignitaries from around the world and was widely seen as closing a chapter on Britain's imperial heroic era. Parallel to his military and political careers, Churchill built an extraordinary life as a writer, which provided both income and a way of shaping his own and his nation's history. His literary work began with campaign narratives from India and Sudan, the story of the Malacon Field Force and the River War, and continued with London to Ladysmith via Pretoria and other Boer war books, which combined reportage, self-mythologizing, and strategic commentary. In 1900, he published his only novel, Savrola, but soon focused on nonfiction, biography, history, political essays, and collected speeches. Early major works included a biography of his father, Lord Randolph Churchill, 1906, and Marlborough, His Life and Times, 1933-38, a multi-volume study of his ancestor, the first Duke of Marlborough, that also served as a reflection on strategy, leadership, and coalition warfare. After World War II, Churchill turned his experience into the Second World War, 6 volumes, 1948-1953, a sweeping narrative that drew heavily on documents and his own perspective, helping to shape public understanding of the conflict while naturally presenting himself in a central, often favorable role. His final major project, A History of the English-Speaking Peoples, 4 volumes, 1956-1958, traced the intertwined histories of Britain, the United States, and other Anglophone nations, expressing his long-standing belief in a transatlantic community of values and interests. In 1953, Churchill received the Nobel Prize in Literature for his mastery of historical and biographical description, as well as for brilliant oratory in defending exalted human values, recognizing not just his war memoirs, but the totality of his output, including speeches, histories, and biographies. Estimates suggest he wrote 8 to 10 million words across more than 40 books and countless articles and speeches, making writing not only his main source of income for much of his life, but also a way of wrestling with his own demons, his black dog of depression, and leaving a crafted record of his times. Churchill's life defies simple judgment. He was a fervent imperialist who opposed Indian independence, a politician associated with controversial decisions from Gallipoli to interwar gold standard policies, and a man whose attitudes on race and empire reflect his Victorian aristocratic upbringing. Yet he was also the leader who, at a moment of profound danger, articulated Britain's will to resist Nazi Germany in language that galvanized a nation and inspired allies, and a writer who turned political and military experience into narratives that still shape how millions understand the 20th century. His early years as a soldier and war correspondent forged the courage and appetite for risk that marked his later leadership. His long parliamentary career honed his oratory and political instincts. His wartime premiership showed how words and resolve can matter as much as material, and his retirement writings turned personal experience into public memory. If his life contains contradictions, it also illustrates how one individual, rooted in a specific class and empire, navigated an age of unprecedented upheaval and left behind both decisions and stories that continue to be debated by historians and the wider public alike.